Continuing with Chapter 13 of The Sword and the Stone by T.H. White, the wart has been turned into a snake by Merlin and is hiding in a nettle bush getting a history lesson from another snake. And so we continue. Do you mean that when you were born there were no birds or men? No birds or men. No monkeys or reindeer or elephants or any such animals. Only the amphibia and the reptiles and the fishes and the Mesozoic world. That's history, added the snake thoughtfully. One of those H. sapiens barbatos males may think of that next time he murders Teenatrix for being a viper. There is something wrong about the will of the There is something wrong. There is something strange about the will of the sea. It is bound up with the history of my family. Did you ever hear the story of H. sapiens, Armatus Gregorius Sanctus? I don't think I did, said the wart. Once very long ago, when even Teenatrix was young and hopeful, there were two families called Atlantosaurus Imantus and Ceratosaurus Nasticornus. Atlantosaurus was 115 feet long. He had not many brains, although I did hear once that he had something like an extra brain at the other end of him to take care of his tail, and he lived by browsing in the trees. He was timid, ruminant, and harmless, except to the tree frogs which he munched by mistake among the boughs. He lived very long, and thought all the time, so that although he did not think very well, he had generally thought a good deal by the end of it. So far as I can remember, he had solved the problem of being a giant without breaking, on account of his own weighty height of 20 feet, by having his bones hollow. The birds do that too, you know, for other reasons. However, perhaps I am muddling him up with another of the dinosauria. Ceratosaurus Nasticornus was quite small. He was only 17 feet long, but he had teeth, great crushing and tearing teeth, which fitted into each other so badly that he leaped away from his slaughterous mouth half open in a grin of terror. He leaped like a kangaroo, a death-dealing kangaroo, and he generally leaped upon poor Atlantosaurus Imantus. He had a horn upon his nose like a rhinoceros, with which he could rip an opening in that big and trundling old body, and his clamouring teeth could meet in the flesh as in ripe fruit, and tear it out in mouthfuls by the action of his muscular neck. What is more terrible, he leaped in packs. Ceratosaurus Nasticornus was at war with Atlantosaurus Imantus, in that strange war which the spirit of the waters wills, the war of competition and evolution which makes the trees fight upwards for the sun on the Amazon, and in the course of which, for the boon of life, many of my cousins have been content to sacrifice the benefits of limbs and teeth and eyesight. Ceratosaurus was savage and aggressive, Atlantosaurus timid and old. Their combat lasted for many centuries, as was needed by H. sapiens, also in which to destroy himself. At the end of that time, it was the defender who triumphed. The ferocious kangaroo had dealt death on every side, had decimated his adversaries, and fed upon their carcasses. But carcasses cannot continue their species, and in the end the kangaroos had consumed the very flesh on which they lived. Too remorseless for the spirit of the waters, too bloodthirsty for the hierarchy of progressive victims, the last Ceratosaurus roamed the thick-leaved jungles, in vain searching for the food which could satisfy its gnashing jaws, then died and slept with his fathers. At last Atlantosaurus thrust her 40-foot neck out of the jungle in which she had been hiding, and surveyed the emaciated corpse of her starved persecutor. She had persevered her life as a sensible wood pigeon does. She had preserved her life as the sensible wood pigeon does By specializing in escape, she had learned to flee, to hide, to stand still, to control her scent, to conceal herself in waters. By humanity she had survived her enemy, who had slain her own husband, and now she carried the children of the latter inside her, the last of her victorious race. They would be born in a few years. H. sapiens had come meanwhile. He also had suffered from the terror of the kangaroo in order to protect himself from its rapine, which he had developed a subclass called H. sapiens armatus, a class which concealed in metal scales and carried a lance by means of which to defend itself against the dinosauria. This subclass had perfected an order called H. sapiens armatus Georgius Sanctus, which was sufficiently unobservant to classify all the dinosaurs together as its enemies. Atlantosaurus thrust out its neck and thought with triumph of her unborn children. She had never killed in her life, and these the future would perpetuate a vegetarian race. She heard the clank of H. sapien armatus Gorgeous Sanctus, turned the comely reptile head toward him in her kindly curiosity. "Go on," said the ward. "He killed her, of course," concluded the serpent, with sudden brevity, turning its own head away. "She was a reptile of my race." "I am sorry," said the wart. "I don't know what to say." "There is nothing, dear," said the patient serpent, "that you can say. Perhaps I had better tell you a legend or dream to change the subject." The wart said, "I don't think I want to hear it if it is sad." "There is nothing sad," said the other, "except history. All these things are only something to muse upon while you are hibernating." "Is it a good thing to muse?" "Well, it passes the time. Even H. sapiens has museums, you know. And as far as that goes, he has put the chalky bones of Atlantosaurus in many of them, along with the scales of Gorgeous Sanctus." "If you know a fairly cheerful legend," said the wart, "I think I could bear to hear that." "Ridiculous newt," said Teenatrix affectionately, for newt seemed to be one of his pet words. "I suppose I shall have to tell you the legend of my dangerous cousins for whom I suffer." "Is it cheerful?" "Well, it just goes on to the end, you know, and then stops, as legends do." "Tell it," said the wart. "This legend," said the snake in its sing-song voice after a preparatory cough, "comes from Burma, a place of which you have probably never heard. Once upon a time there was only one poisonous serpent in the world, and this was the python. As you know, he is no longer venomous, and the story of how he lost his venom is an interesting one. In those days he was perfectly white. He happened to make the acquaintance of the wife of a human being, whose name was Aunt Ewe, and in the course of the time they fell in love with each other. Aunt Ewe left her husband and went off to live with the python, whose name was P. reticulatus. She was in some ways an old-fashioned kind of person, the kind which delights in making carpet slippers for creatures among the humans, and she set about weaving a most handsome and closely woven skin for her python. It was an ornamental affair, with black lozenges and yellow dots, and here and there, at rectangular intervals, cubes and cross-stitches of amber, such as the humans use in rug-making or working samplers. P. reticulatus was pleased with it and wears it always, so that now he is not white any more. At this time, the python was interested in making experiments with his unique venom. Since he was the only poisonous snake, he naturally contained within himself all the poison which is nowadays spread out among the snakes. So concentrated was this terrible poison, therefore, that he could kill a man, however far away he was, but simply by biting any footprint which the man had happened to leave on the ground. P. reticulatus was naturally proud of this accomplishment, but he could never get ocular proof of it. He could not be there to see the man die, and at the same time 3 or 4 miles away, to bite his footprint. Yet he wanted very much to establish the truth of the experiment. One day, he decided that he would have to rely on evidence. He persuaded a crow that was his friend to go off to the village of Cairns. This was the name of the men in the district, and to watch and see if the man did die while he was biting the footprint. Now the Cairns had a curious habit of celebrating a death or a funeral, not by tears and lamentations, but by laughing, singing, dancing, jumping and beating on drums. When the crow arrived to watch the events from a tree, and after the man had died, the Cairns began to perform their usual rites in front of the hut in which he lay stricken. So the crow, after looking for some time, returned to the python, and reported that so far from slaying by the venom of his bite, it had only the effect of causing extreme joy in the human beings, and of transporting them into the 7th heaven. The python was so furious that he climbed up to the very top of a tree, and sucked up every ounce of his useless poison. Of course the poison had to fall on something. Although the python had lost his power to sting, the tree itself became venomous, and its juice is used to this day to poison arrows, while several creatures, which happened to be underneath it, received a due share. The cobra, the water snake, and the frog were among them. Now Aunt Eu naturally had a soft spot for her fellow mortals, and when it was discovered that the poison was venomous after all, she upbraided P. reticulatus for spreading the power to slay among so many beings. P. reticulatus, who was grateful for his woven coat, felt remorse for what he had done, and hurried off to see how he could improve matters. He explained the nature of poison to all the creatures which had received it, and asked them to promise that their use of it should not be tyrannical. The cobra agreed to the remarks of the python, and said, "If there be transgression, so as to dazzle my eyes, to make my tears fall 7 times in one day, I will bite, but only then." So said most of the kindlier creatures, but the water snake and the silly frog said they did not see what all this had to do with the python, and that they intended for their part to bite whenever they felt like it. The python immediately set upon them, chased them into the water, and there, of course, the poison was dissolved and washed away. The wart waited to see if there was any more of this story, but there was not. The voice of Teenatrix had been getting slower and sleepier toward the end of it, for the afternoon was advancing and the wind was beginning to fall cold. The sing-song had seemed to get more and more wrapped up in the subject. If you can follow the idea until it seemed that the story was telling itself while the serpent only drowsed, though it was not possible to tell whether he was really asleep, because snakes have no eyelids to close. "Thank you," said the wart. "I think that was a good story." "Dream about it," whispered Teenatrix sleepily, "while you hibernate." "I will." "Good night," said the snake. "Good night." The funny thing was that the wart really did feel sleepy, whether it was the voice of the snake or the cold or the influence of the story. In 2 minutes he was dreaming himself a reptilian dream. He was old as the veins of the earth, which were serpents like him. An Aesculapius with a beard and as white as glaciers was lulling him to sleep. He was teaching his wisdom, the ancient wisdom by which the old snakes could walk with 300 feet at once upon the same world in which their grandchildren, the birds, have learned to fly. He was singing to him the song of all the waters. And I will stop there.